evening to everyone. This is Larry Camp, the pastor of the Bethlehem Baptist Church in Brooklyn, affectionately known as the Bethlehem Nation. We're so glad to have you to be a part of Insight. Not only that, we welcome all of you, and we especially and particularly welcome the wonderful people of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. Insight is a program designed that we get some thoughtful thinkers to be on this program that will add to us, and that their experiences we hear, and in some way they can pour into our intellect as we begin to know things. There are a lot of things that we think we know, but we'd be surprised what we don't know as it relates to having people to come on. Our guest tonight is a colleague and a friend, the Reverend Dr. Gary V. Simpson, the pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ. And we're so glad to have Dr. Simpson with us on this evening. Dr. Simpson, man, it's good to see you, man. First of all, I like that top. I love that, man. I love that top. It's really nice.
I knew where I was going to be tonight. Good evening, Pastor. It's a delight to be with you, people of Bethlehem Nation, and I know there's some Concord people listening to us now, as well as friends and colleagues from all over. I'm glad to be with you. I'm honored. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Well, you have a lot of colleagues that's all over that are tuning in, and I'm so glad you're with us on tonight. Now, Dr. Simpson, if I bring up some topics, if they seem a bit not some academic, but if they seem elementary, it's not to be elementary. It's because sometimes in life and even in school or education, we think that we know things, and we only ask these questions or have them to be before us as terms of topic discussions so that you can give clarity of exactly what that is. So here's what I'm going to ask you now. Give the basic breakdown of seminary work and how it differs from undergrad work.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I'm very happy to be here and to talk with you. I want to say that that these are important conversations, and I'm looking forward to talking. Starting right with seminary, bam, we're right in the middle of it. Let me say that I can explain it this way. I had a brother who has now passed, who went to Virginia Union University and skipped his senior year and went to Meharry Medical College and became a doctor. He was supposed to spend 4 years in college. He only spent 3. He got into the program and he spent 3 years in med school. I graduated from college, and then I went to seminary for a 3-year degree for Master of Divinity. Before the Master of Divinity was created, it was a Bachelor's of Divinity, which many of people who are ahead of us in generation got a Bachelor of Divinity, and perhaps even in a college. But a Master of Divinity or seminary degree or whatever, MA and a seminary degree, is intentioned to give people who have done undergraduate work the opportunity to study, particularly in the field of ministry, which is a wide field. It used to just be that people were going to become pastors of churches or academicians, one of those two. There's the other track is, of course, some seminaries have a PhD program where people actually go to teach, which is even another 4 to 6 years beyond that. But it really is an opportunity to sit in a space and to become educated, as opposed to what we do when we talk about church. We train people. We train people to do specific things. Education has to do with exposure. It has to do with learning the breadth of things. So all the things that one would take into seminary from a church or from one's own understanding of reading the Bible or whatever might be challenged, changed, charged, substituted, fought against, resisted, as people come to know a fuller sense of themselves and the study of not just the church, but of the faith and theology.
When you're teaching at Drew now, I remember the late Dr. Johnny, I was about to say Johnny Green, the late Dr. Johnny, oh my God.
McCann.
Johnny McCann had me to go up there for a tour. And his words to me was, I was told by Dr. Gary V. Simpson, don't let camp leave until I see him, something to that effect. But he had really encouraged me to go as it relates to being there. And of course, I did not go. And I don't mind telling you, Dr. Simpson, that what I have is an undergrad in social science. And I really, really tried to get in. I tried to get in union. I had to write exactly what I was supposed to write in terms to enter there. And apparently the response was, we're still not clear on why. And I'm good with that. But at this stage in my life, not to say that education is not important, because it still is, I wish I would have certainly expanded that whole concept of education, and including very much so. But I don't know if it would have been in the MDiv, because I think I've talked to you in private and how much I really love history and how much that really inspires me a lot. So now that you are at Drew,
mm-hmm.
What inspired you to become a professor?
Well, it's interesting. If I really told my story right, I was a boy preacher. I got started much too early, I think. Now that I look back on it, but I made up my mind that I was going to go to school when I was going to prepare. I thought what I would be doing is teaching at a college or a university somewhere, and then pastoring, on the weekend, doing the pastoral life on the weekend, which will actually, I have my life in reverse. I am still very much the leading pastor at Concord, and I teach in addition to that at the school. So I think to be a professor, a teacher, is to be committed to a life of study and to be committed to being a student forever. I love to learn. I'm remembering Dr. Taylor got the Union Medal when I was at Union, and James Washington, the church historian, gave this phrase about Dr. Taylor. He said that he is both a pastoral scholar and a scholarly pastor. And when I heard that as an MDiv student, I said, I want to be that. I want to be one of those, right? And I think that's, I'm not bivocational. I have one calling, and it manifests itself in two places, both in the church as a leading pastor, and in the academy as a trainer and mentor and teacher of students who are interested in going into the ministry.
That now, you and your very cerebral wife, Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson, who I had the pleasure of hearing her last Thursday, interview Robert Byrd. Of course, one of his books is White Too Long, and,
right.
And she did an exceptional job in terms of interviewing. I thought it was a great exchange between her and Dr. Byrd, and so I really commend. And then you have your children. I know your relationship with your children is so genuine. What I'm saying is, I've seen the pictures that y'all take, man. These faces y'all make is just like is really something. And I know of your daughter Candace, who's also a graduate from Union. Now, if there are other of your children that are, please correct me on that, Dr. Simpson. But
I have other children, but I try to keep them out of my public life so we can have fun together on the side. I never wanted them. My son. I have a son who's just under Candace, and I did not want to name him Junior. I didn't want to name him after me. I wanted him to be able, if he needed to get away from my name, that he could do that. Somebody could say, "Oh, you Gary Simpson's son?" No, not that one. Another Simpson. I wanted him to have that freedom for himself. And then we have a youngest daughter now, but we enjoy each other. And I must say that what I loved about, and what I still love to this day, and I'll always be grateful to the people of Concord, because they never made me have to make a decision between being a present father and being a pastor. And they
Yeah.
understood at every level and every moment. I'd bring when they were kids, when they were toddlers, I'd bring them into the office with me, and they would do office hours with me. And I felt, as many of us do, about pastoral duty. Well, if I have pastoral duty, I can't do that. Concord has always given me the space, and they have allowed me to both, because sometimes, quite honestly, the churches and the families become competing for the attention,
Absolutely.
right? And but I've never had to make that decision, and I'm grateful for that. And yes, Em and I have a wonderful time. We met at Union in the social hall, and we both have different.
Well, how appropriate is that? Okay,
How appropriate. Henry and Ella Mitchell met in the elevator at Union, and Em and I met in the social hall at Union. We have two very different versions of that story, so I won't bore you with that. but the end result is the same. We are here together, and I think one of the things we did, and I don't know that we were smart enough. This was not a stroke of genius or intelligence or anything like that. I can remember very vividly, we were walking down Broadway, and when we had kind of figured out that we had an intention for each other, we said, well, this is not going to be your ministry or my ministry. It is the Lord's ministry, and we're going to figure out what pieces we do together in that. And that has kept us from, stumbling over each other. She's gifted in her own right, and
absolutely,
and has her own work, but yet we are very much partners in the work that we feel God is calling us to do in this moment.
It's so apparent and it's so obvious that you enjoy being around your children and they enjoy being around both you. And I think that's really a blessed moment to be able to have that to happen, because as you said, in ministry, sometimes family can be divided, but you certainly made that a priority of how you both and how you all encourage one another. Now, having the fact that you and Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson met at Union in the social hall.
In the social hall.
What was Union like? I mean, and the reason why I asked you that, Dr. Simpson, is that there are many people in New York, there are many preachers in New York who've heard of Union, don't know about Union, but only hear with those. And here's what those who have said. And one who had said to me, a graduate from Union, says, well, Larry, I don't advise you to go to Union. Now, of course, whatever experience that they had. What was Union like for you personally?
Well, let me tell you what it was like. I had options to go to other schools, but I had met, these were the people who were teaching at Union when I went. So James Cone, of course, was teaching in theology. Cornel West was teaching at the philosophy of religion at that moment. When I met Cornel West, he was there. He was 29, and he had already been there 6 years. So
wow.
That tells you something about that. And then Jim Forbes was the professor of homiletics, and James Washington was a professor of church history. At that moment in time, this is the 80s. This is right after the kind of Black consciousness movement. This is in the retrenchment of Ronald Reagan and all of that.
Yes.
And that many of us in the church were grabbing on to the vestiges and the hopes and the promises and all the power of Black consciousness. We were getting ready to jump into Malifi Asante's Afrocentrism, but at that moment, this was the place you wanted to be. And even though sometimes Union does not want to admit it, the church is in Harlem. The school is in Harlem. And with a mecca of Black churches at that time, it just represented so much of what was the good. Now, I think in my instance that because I was a religion major in college and all, I enjoyed the experience at Union. I think if people believe that seminary is just supposed to pat you on the back about the things you think about already, it's really not doing its job. The purpose of the university model is to get in a space and to exchange ideas. You see that in the New Testament. And Paul at the Areopagite, as they're all talking about God's, and then Paul pulls out this text. He says, well, let me tell you about that unknown God, right? And he starts to explain it, it much more represented, I think, the diversity of the cultures, the not just Christian faith, but theological discourse, which is not always the same. There are people there who are not Christians. We were right across the street from Jewish Theological Seminary. We had the opportunity to engage with the scholars there, where Abraham Heschel was a professor for many, many years. So Union was the place to be, man. I mean, there was no other choice for somebody who was serious about, at that time, for me. There was no other choice for somebody who was serious about the Black church, Black religious expression, and Black community. And so that's how I ended up there. I almost went to Harvard, but I came back home, and Union had given me a scholarship, which was just going to be enough money for me to go. And so that's how I ended up there. My father prayed about that, but that's a whole other stuff.
There are those that I know in New York that have gone to Union. And there are so much more, but the ones that I know that Karen Jones went there, Sharon Williams certainly attended there, Reverend David Kelly, Reverend Marvin Bentley. Many of them had gone to Union. And so naturally, being in many of their companies, at some point I wanted to be, a part of that in terms of that learning, but not necessarily to be a part of a clique, to be a part of that learning. So now you touched on something. What is homiletics and hermeneutics?
Okay, good. Well, I am the professor of homiletics, which just basically means that I am the professor of preaching. Homiletics is the study of preaching. So it has to do with the process, the form, the history, the rhetoric, and in many ways, people teach now the biographies of people who have actually done that work, contextual understanding of church and what does it mean to speak for God, or to speak not as God, but for God in faith communities. Now, how you get the homiletics? You can't really get the homiletics without hermeneutics, which is what we all do, what we all should do, and that is to interpret. Right? When we read a text, we are always interpreting. Somebody said, "Well, this is what the text originally means." We are 2 millennia away from the happenings in Palestine, and our language has changed since then. Even none of us who are saying this is what it says actually spoke the language of the people who actually said it. and so as words travel through the centuries, right, they are also, they collect both the good and the bad of cultures. Like a simple thing, Boykin Sanders, New Testament scholar down at Virginia Union, argues that when King James got to the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, right, that, and if you read it in the King James Version, you'll see it say, and the greatest of these is charity, right? That the word really is love, right? Yeah, and that he spoke about how this might be the sneaking in of a kind of Eurocentric condescension, right, upon the other people. So if I love you, I'm giving you charity as opposed to mutuality and respect. Having those kind of conversations are very important. That the nuancing of those of the words that we see and that we read, we know that biblical scholarship has been going on for a long time, but Black people, African diasporatic people, have not had the access to what I would argue to the accrediting of the German school of Bible.
Yes.
But we have had, since my going to seminary, we have had a number of people. I mean, Katie Cannon, who was at Union, a Black woman, first Black woman to actually enter into the Old Testament program, and a white professor decided that there was no way they were going to let a Black woman get a degree in Bible.
Yeah.
Right. And so she ended up pivoting to another to ethics, and an amazing, God bless her, man. We are still reaping the benefits of the work that she did, but there was not access. We can go on. Renita Weems, Kane Hopefelder, Boykin Sanders, I mentioned earlier. Now we have a number of younger Black scholars who benefited from the tolls that those folks paid, right? Who now give us access to read this Bible for ourselves, right? And not to say that we're getting, that's what hermeneutics does, Benson Wimbush, Dr. Benson Wimbush, did a very thick volume on African Americans and the Bible, right? Tremendous work, New Testament scholar, right? Tremendous work that gave us access to claim the faith for ourselves, and not necessarily through somebody else's hermeneutic of what the Christian message meant. Yeah.
Wow. Now, with when we talk about misunderstanding of some texts in some languages, I want to ask you this: what is the misunderstanding of Black Lives Matter, and how important is it?
Yeah, we're all troubled. Well, let me back up by saying that whenever Black people take agency for themselves, it makes other people nervous, right?
Yeah.
And so we had this movement started by Black women who were really interested in, tired of watching the deaths of young Black men at the hands of needless violence, much of it at the hands of police and or so-called self-deputized vigilantes, right?
Yeah.
And as they started this movement and went to the streets, and this is the important thing. I think we have this in the psyche of this country, of this nation. We don't understand that to protest for rights is one of the founding principles of a democracy, that the majority, the people who are not heard, should have and do have the right to protest for the rights they are not getting in the policies and in the procedures of governments. But of course, just like when there was an old study done, Google had a little thing where you say teenagers, and if you would type in teenagers, you would get pictures of white teenagers modeling for the Target or for some magazine like J.C. Penney's or something. If you said Black teenagers, then you got all these images of thuggery and of gangs and of violence, and the association of Black with violence, the skipping over of Black lives, the devaluing of Black bodies, the dehumanizing of Black people is at the center of what Black Lives Matter stands for. And yet we are uncomfortable, and we heard this as recently as last night. we are uncomfortable when Black people who are tired of, again, being dehumanized, devalued. It is bad enough to be invisible. It's another thing to be inhumane.
Yeah.
And what we have discovered about power in this nation and in human beings, the first way to annihilate any other human being is to consider them inhuman, right?
Yeah.
So Black Lives Matter is a claiming of the space, of the value of every Black body, the love of every Black boy and girl, the sense that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying you're not going to forget us. I think one of the problems in this country is, though, that Black people are the living and breathing evidence that America is not living into what it's the ideal of democracy and justice for all. Yeah, and that's why people are out. And I think, I think that those of us, even some of us in the church, don't get that. We think that that the Black Lives Matter is some kind of renegade vigilantes. But see,
right.
But Larry, you know this. People who say that haven't read American history, don't know about the infiltration of the Black Panthers and the nation and
Absolutely.
other activist groups by the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover, who had Operation, I can't remember what it's called, infiltration or something, where he was going to get people to instigate violence at the site for people where people peacefully protested.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. We've seen that repeated so many times. I don't trust any of the reports of violence from these sites that say that the protesters were responsible for that. We saw that here in New York. We saw people coming from down in the Catskills, starting firebombing police vans and things like that. And these are not people who live in the neighborhood where Black people are making these noises. They come to instigate, infiltrate, and thereby somehow to dismiss the real call for justice. Black Lives Matter is a call for justice. It is saying to this country that nobody has to spend time talking about white lives matter in America. We know that. We know that. What we don't know is 400 years of continuous dismissal and devaluing has put us in the position that we are not going to be denied what this country owes to us. And I'm not even talking about how much money is owed to Black people for building all this for free. I'm just talking about what is owed to us in the principles of the Republic.
Now, Dr. Simpson, that's another argument for another day. Not argument, another discussion for another day. And one of Robert Byrd's book that he wrote, I think it was in 2016, called, and I'm paraphrasing, The Decline of White Christian America, and how white Christian America and how generally it's taught, or it has been taught, or as it has been received by Black people, as it relates to, the late Butterfly McQueen, who played in the movie Gone with the Wind, had the one iconic line that said, "Miss Scarlett, I know nothing about birth and no babies." And she admitted that she was an atheist, and she gave her reasons. She says, "I'm not going to join any faith that bombs churches and lynches people. That's a faith I do not want to be a part of." Robert Byrd brought that up in his book, which, of course, when I said a discussion that has to be had even now because of how Christianity was taught, and it basically was taught in limitations. You know this more than I do. Slaves, be obedient to your masters. You already know that.
Yeah. Well, and of course, we've just gotten our hand on recently a copy of the Slave Bible, right? Which was what was taught to slaves. It's a funny thing, all the things that are missing out of it, right? What's missing out of it? The book of Exodus, right? All the prophets, much of what Jesus said about setting people free, the excerpt, kind of cherry picking things that would make people compliant. And, I was telling somebody about this today, that the faith comes in two ways. One, people who believe that faith is law and order, right? And that what you have to do is obey all the laws and live in that, right? And you do these things. There are other people who have seen that even law and order, as however it is described, is also limited, and that somehow the true essence of what the Bible is talking about is the freedom to be human, to be the people, to connect to ourselves as being created in the image of God, as Genesis so declares. And that's a different kind of move from, and although, Pastor, there are some of us who preach that very entrapping, shackling, bondage religion.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We preach about bondage. And yet, and that is because the people who have taught us have taught us very thoroughly. And
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that's why you claim your own space for the right to learn and to teach oneself, right? How do we, through our experience, understand this? I heard Dr. Taylor say once in the sermon that Black people heard the gospel. They were told one thing, but they heard another.
They heard.
They were told, slaves, be obedient to your master, but what they heard was, the one who I set free is free indeed. And that kind of contradiction, which is so present even now as we listen to people who claim to be Christian folks, who are chasing after money and chasing after access to power, and who have sold out their very God to be clicked on the platform with somebody. We're not going to talk about that tonight.
Right. I understand.
And
yes,
so,
sir.
Who have traded freedom for a different kind of slavery, right?
Wow.
And that's a part of the thing you and I are fighting every Sunday when we get up, because our people who come to hear us have heard that pablum 3 or 4 times before they even got to our church. They heard it in the bedroom. They heard in the bedroom they're getting dressed. They heard it in the kitchen playing on the radio, and they heard it on the drive over. And so I'm fighting every Sunday this kind of shackling sense of what it means to be Christian, this narrow sense of accommodation and of just keeping your nose clean. And if you just pray about it, everything will be all right. Now we're back to Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter says to us in the church that there's some things that prayer by itself is not going to fix.
Exactly. That's very important. There was a senior in my church. She's going on to be with the Lord. Her name was Virginia Brown. And I used to talk about so many things that we hope to do. And she used to say these things to me. She says, Reverend, you need to put some legs under your prayers, which is, I mean, that was so powerful for me, that here was a woman out of the state of Virginia said, you need to put some legs under your prayers.
There you are. There you are. And it is not as simple as the Bible that says watch it as well as pray. What she says is right. Put some legs under that.
Put some legs under it. Don't just pray about, do something with it. Yeah.
And here, what you just illustrated is that Black people have always been doing good theology, right? We have, it is not something necessarily that we had to get in some other space. These folks have been thinking about God and the struggle of what it means to be a follower of Christ and yet be in all the other ways we described today: rejected, despised, abused, molested, raped, all these things that have been a part of our experience. But put some legs under that prayer, Pastor. I can hear say we all need a Sister Brown or two in the church, man. We all need that. That's for sure.
My guest tonight is Dr. Gary V. Simpson, the pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ, which is now in his 30th year. 30 years.
30 years, man.
30 years that Dr. Simpson has been there, and I would say doing a work in such creativity that does not require boasting or bragging. I've seen how that has been demonstrated in your life and in the wonderful people of the Concord Church. Now, you talked about your children, and we all know about your personal joys and watching their development now. How has the pandemic affected you, and not only your family, but the Concord people and the community to which Concord is stationed?
Yeah. Well, I think the last thing is perhaps not the easiest to talk about, but the reality is that Concord was in the community hit hardest. As you know, in Brooklyn, the community is hit hardest by the COVID-19. We were in the middle of a building project, and all of a sudden we had to leave the building, right? And it was traumatic, I think, in many ways. We lost, I think, since February, we've had about 38 deaths in the church. Not all of those were COVID related, but that's a part of the COVID challenge, right? That is that even in the midst of a pandemic, other people die for other reasons, and they also need attention and their families. But all of these families were unable to have what would be our usual way of sending them off. That was hard, man. I have to be honest with you as a pastor. That was one of the toughest things. Every member who dies, I'm the last person to see them before they close the casket, and I always bend over and kiss them. Man, I've had 40 people who I couldn't do that farewell as a pastor with, as a friend, as a brother, as a family member. Man, that was hard, right? And we've adapted. We do a Zoom service every Sunday, and that's a joy to us all when everybody comes in the room and you see all the faces and you get to speak to everybody. It's a wonderful thing. But what this has done to all of us, not just Concord, what it's done to all of us is that it has decentered our ministry from the building itself. It has caused us to do things beyond the building, to understand. In some ways, COVID has given us the opportunity to do something that all those church services haven't done. And that is for people to take that religion back home into their houses when they get, when church is over. I think, but it's been a struggle. I mean, one of the things I'm lamenting right now is, whenever, and we have decided not to go back into the building until 2021. But when we get back, I'm missing right now in this moment our communal singing. We sing in our houses with the music, but not just the choir, the congregation, the way in which Black voices blended together catch all the pathos of all the hell we're catching and all the heaven we need, right? At the same time. And I'm missing some of those sounds. But we are going on. I'm grateful the people have not missed a beat. And we don't know, when we go back, we're wrestling now with what it means to go back, because we can't. The church that we left on the 15th of March, is not going to be the church that we go back into.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We got to figure out now, you know, how to do church in a way where historically, for Black people, the church represented, the building represented collective accomplishments. It might be the one place in the community in our whole life where we can say, this is ours, right?
Yeah.
And that joy of having this is ours now has to be challenged by the other understanding of who are we. It is not the stuff we have. It is who are we as the body of Christ, and that's the biggest kind of shifting I think we're going to all experience as we kind of come through to the other side of this. Yeah.
Concord was organized, I believe, in 1863. I believe 1863.
1847.
1847.
Yeah, don't cheat me out of any of those.
No,
years.
I'm not going to do that. Those are some years. Oh my goodness, the history there. Of course, the fire that took place in the year that I was born, 1952, and all of that goes with it. Now, I want to ask you this, and I don't mind asking you because you're the first person I've asked this. First of all, let me just say this about Dr. Gary Simpson as a person who has become a tremendous friend to me, who I really admire and respect. But I also think, and this is just offering this opinion, I don't mind saying this to you, Gary, I'm from Brooklyn, but I think you're probably one of the most misunderstood persons that's out there. What I mean by that is you're not hard to know, but like anyone else, I mean, for me personally, I'm an introverted individual, I always have been. And I think that brings misunderstanding when people see that. And people don't realize that your genius and what you give to ministry. But I want to ask you this specific question because only I can ask this to you. What words of encouragement would you give a preacher who is called to an iconic pulpit? Now, Bethlehem is not iconic. We just celebrated 75 years. But a church that was born in 1847, what encouragement or words of advice do you give to a preacher who's called to an iconic pulpit?
That's a great question. I might want to argue that because of the pandemic and many other things, there might not be many more iconic pulpits.
I see what you're saying.
In
Yes,
the future. And the proliferation of technology, right? So that on any Sunday or Saturday or Wednesday, that there's a proliferation of all kind of iconic, so to speak, works. But first thing, and I appreciate the question, and I'll be honest with you. First, always be yourself. There were moments when I first got started where if something went well in the church, people will say, Dr. Taylor told him to do that, right? Or if something went bad, you should have talked to Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor and I were always in conversation. We had a wonderful relationship, and I was blessed to follow him. But it was also a challenge. I don't know that. I think I said to the people, I said to people when I came there, when I arrived, look, I'm not expecting to replace Dr. Taylor in your hearts, but I hope your hearts will get large enough so there'll be space for both of us, right?
Yeah.
And that did happen over time. My first thing is don't be in a rush. Don't be in a rush to establish yourself. There are some things now at 30 years in that I'm just now realizing about me, right? That now give me some opportunity to do some things that if I had tried them in my first 30 months, we might not be talking right now in this conversation, right? Give yourself time to grow, and recognize that you will grow, and recognize that I said this to somebody once. I said, the problem with the contemporary time is that many people confuse a pastor's installation with a coronation. And it is not a coronation. It is not a coronation. It is an opportunity for us to love and live with the people. Jim Washington gave me the best advice. He said, Reverend, love the people and preach the gospel. It's so simple, but it was so. I genuinely, you asked me about the pandemic. I don't know if I would have made it this far in this pandemic if it wasn't for the love of the people of Concord Church, right? Yeah. There's sometimes I didn't feel like it, where I was worn out, where I was just enough, but they gave me what I needed just by seeing their faces, just by their words of encouragement, just by the fact that they keep showing up, that when the church door closed, people didn't stop calling to check on you and to see how you were doing and that kind of thing. Give the people a chance. No pastor goes into a church knowing what to do. What to do evolves. It evolves with time and with circumstance and with things that are not in our control. We may have an idea. I always tell folks, this is a trick question. If you ever before a pulpit committee and they ask you, now you've never been to the church, you just talked to the 7 to 8 people sitting in that room, and they ask you, what's your vision for our church? If you have a vision you can answer, you've already blown it. You can't know that until you get among the people, until they become a part of you and you become a part of them. And I would admit if I had to do all over again, I might do some different things at the beginning. I would do some different things at the beginning, but I was so scared to come to this responsibility and not measure up, right? That's the biggest fear. I'm still working on that. I still have that fear. but I think the other thing I would say is learn the full history of the church.
Yes.
And from the beginning to the end, and recognize the wisest person in the world other than our Lord Christ was the guy who baptized him, who had sense enough to say, there comes one after me.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think if you put yourself in the position to not feel yourself as always of the pressure of the people who've gone before you, the question is, what are you going to leave? What's your legacy, continued legacy for the people who are behind you? What are you going to do to make this space a better place for however long God gives you? And to recognize, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were discussing the classification of interim pastor. And I said, well, we're all interim pastors. Some of us just stay longer than the rest. And I think that's true. How long? What can I do? What is my stewardship question for myself? And I can only be me. And that's the truth. I can only be me. I cannot be somebody else. And I have to convince myself of that first, and then show myself to the people as I am. And thank God they've been gracious to do that. My first response to that was, don't do it. Don't do it. But I think here's another thing to be said. And I think not all of these historic, you call iconic, historic churches need to die.
Yeah.
We were 1847, our first pastor was an abolitionist. 1851, the second pastor pastored for 2 years. 1851, 1852. You know why? Because he was a runaway slave and he had to go for he had to go flee for his life. So that all of these folks had leadership for the time in which they served. And some of that, which was started with Samson White, is in our DNA today. We still got to be a people fighting for abolition and freedom of Black people. We got to do the literacy programs that folks were doing. Got to get people into schools and colleges. We got to supplement education. We got to think about the things Dr. Taylor was thinking about, nursing home, credit union, all these. We got to do that, and we got to do more. And we got to pass some of that on to the people who come behind us.
Yeah. I'm only going to ask you 2 more questions.
Okay.
What books would you recommend to preachers on the come up and laity, or preachers in general?
Oh. Well, I actually think preachers and laity ought to read the same books. I got one book I want to recommend to every preacher and every lay person, the Bible, right? The Bible, but not to use it again as a way of constricting us,
right?
But all in love with the words. You know, I love that King James Version 90s song. Thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations.
Yes.
Before the mountains were brought forth, ever thou hadst formed the earth and the world. From everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Man.
Yeah, man.
And that's where we live, between that first everlasting and that last everlasting, to fall in love with the words. But I'll be honest with you, we gotta, at this moment, given what we're going through with this pandemic and the continuing evolution of systemic racism, at this moment, we got to think Black and we got to build Black, right? So I've been reading for the last couple of summers. Last summer, I didn't mean to do it, but it just happened that way. Every book I read last summer was either about a Black woman or written by Black women, right? So I read Imani Perry's Looking for Lorraine Hansberry. I read a book on Prathia Hall, Freedom, Faith, the womanist vision of Prathia Hall. And I read a book by a young Black woman, Austin Channing Brown, talking about racism within the evangelical church. And I read all of those, and I worked my way through Ibram Kendi's first book, Stamped from the Beginning, where he kind of lays out the history of racism in America, which is important. And to me, quite honestly, much more important book than How to Be an Anti-Racist. You know, this culture likes these how-to books because they don't have to think. You know, just tell me how to do it, you know. And when they get finished reading, they're still going to be racist. You understand what I'm saying? But I prefer that book. This summer, I've read Eddie Glaude's Begin Again with his take on James Baldwin. A fascinating book of realizing how ignorant I am of Black women's history of the United States. 2 young Black historians. Let me see, Diana Carey and Callie Gross wrote from 2 different universities. Wonderful book. I read a book on Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. This to kind of understand their story and their struggle. And Octavia Butler, who's a fiction writer, whose book The Parable of the Sower just rips me up every time I read it. And perhaps one of the most important books to read right now is from the woman who wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote about the migration in the 30s to the 50s. She's got a book out now called Caste, E.s.t, where she's describing the connection between the slavery of Black people in America, the untouchable Dalits in India, and Nazi Germany. And one thing she uncovers for us very clearly is that when the Nazis wanted to figure out how to be as vile as they possibly could, they studied American history about slavery.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Now, dude, no 20th century person will ever deny that, except for those people who deny everything, that the Holocaust was a horrific time in human history. But to think that it got its ideological grounding in what white people did to black people in America in the system of slavery just connects all the dots for me, baby. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. It reminds. Go ahead, Doug.
If I might say this, which might be the reason why we did not get a denouncing of white supremacist groups last night.
Well, I want to actually before I do that, what you just said remind me of those exchanges that took place in the movie Heart's War with Bruce Willis and the German soldier. And Bruce Willis, and there was a soldier that was shot, black soldier that was shot. And Bruce Willis says to the German soldier, he says, "So what is this? Because the person is of a lesser race?" And the German soldier looks at him and he says, "But of course, they don't do that in your country." Yeah. I'm quite sure. And I thought that was really kind of, said what you said. Now I want to ask you, what did you think about that Saturday Night Live skit last night?
So the best summation I heard was what CNN correspondent Jake Paul said. It was a hot
mess
in a dumpster fire in a train wreck. It was a hot mess in a dumpster fire in a train wreck. I mean, that sums it up for me. I think we've got a serious thing, and I must say before I go, I want every person to go out and vote, man. Get out and make a vote. Pull that letter or mail it or go early. Go early so they can't figure out how to intimidate you at the polls. If you got early polling, go early. We've seen 100,000 ballots in Brooklyn that were misproduced from the people up in Buffalo who got different names on the front. The reason why there's so much chicanery going on right now, because this is a moment in which the life, the democracy, the idea of democracy is at stake. We still believe in this country, one person, one vote. And in this moment, we have people talking about, and baiting folks into doing vile things in order to defend their country, etc. This is a terrible and sad time to be America. I'm embarrassed, right? I have done no international flying in the last 4 years. I just for what? I don't want to. I went one place. I went to Italy, but this idea of the bullying, the meanness, the deception, all of that. Everybody has to exercise their right, and it's not just about that. It is also about the judges. It's about who sits before you when you are going to be in a court case. Who's going to be the person looking at you? Howard John Wesley did a wonderful piece on this on YouTube this past week about voting, and I hope people will go to see it. A lot of our colleagues are writing about these very things. That man, this is the one thing that we do have that nobody can take away from us. We have to exercise it for ourselves. So, man, but of course, we knew that. We knew that before it started. We remember the stalking in the 2016 election, right? We remember the stalking and all of that. Nobody's fooled by this. And, when people realize their time is winding down, because we keep coming, man. Black lives still matter. Other folks are still coming. Hispanic people are doing their thing.
Yes,
All
sir.
kinds of folks, women are doing their things. LGBTQIA communities are galvanizing to say we are not going to let this go down like this. And with all that said, it could still be rigged.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But deception, that's a whole nother conversation. We don't have time to talk about that. The sleight of hand, prestidigitation. The magicians would say, watch this hand over here, and then they do something with this hand down here, right? And so while we're watching this other hand is taking away health care. This other hand is speaking of all kinds of disregard for poor people and other things. This other hand, so while we're watching this hand over here isn't even paying taxes.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Simpson, let me just say this before we, pretty much conclusion. You have developed some preachers, and only the ones that I really know. Reverend Samuel Phillips, I had the opportunity to be with him on a Good Friday service at the Bedford Central Presbyterian Church, Reverend Clive Neal, who will be interviewed in the month of October. And then, of course, the Reverend Jeffrey Sean Thompson of the Amity Baptist Church. And what is it about Concord preachers that they all seem to be tall? You're tall. I saw your son sky over you. Not just an inch over, he skied over you.
Yeah, he does.
Well, you all from the Watiti tribe, but what is that? How does that present itself?
I don't know anything about the height thing. We do have, I think Reverend Maureen Bowen Avery would say, hey, wait a minute, man, I'm still here too, because she's shorter. But and then Jonathan Tennille, who's out in Chicago, he was short too. We don't discriminate. It just kind of happens that way, But
okay.
I'm grateful. This past month, I was just tired. I hadn't taken a break and anything, and so the associate pastors preached. I could not have preached a better sermon on any one of those Sundays when those associates preached. I'm very happy to be in a church where associates are also committed to that the centrality of the power of the gospel. So I'm really just I'm humbled that on any given day, that any one of them could stand and not stand in my place, but stand in their own place and declare gospel that is profound and helpful for all of us, even me. Yeah.
Well, I will say that, and I know that you're really friends with Hakeem Jeffries, as I am. He'll be interviewed here October the 28th. And 2021, I want to find a way to get to Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson. And I do want to also interview Candace as well, because I think it's important that various age groups would come in to speak to this forum. I want to thank you, Dr. Simpson, for being my guest. Thank you for being a friend. Now, to our trustees who are listening, I'm going to text you an address. And there's something that I would like for you to do for me. You pretty much already know what that is. Dr. Simpson does not have a Cash App, but there is. Well, I see something there. Okay, but at this. Okay, I see that. Thank you, Derek. I want to thank my son-in-law, Minister Derek Jackson. I want to thank my two daughters, Asia Camp Jackson, my youngest daughter, Naja, my administrative assistant, Linda Kendall, for being such tremendous producers. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this. Dr. Simpson, thank you once again, brother. I'll be in contact with you. And again, thank you so much for your intellect. Thank you for your information. And thank you for your insight.
Bless you, man. It's a delight to be with you. Thank you for having me, Larry. The Lord be good to you, man. Blessings on you and the Bethlehem Nation for letting me just pause for a little while. I've enjoyed the ride.
Bless you, brother.
Man.
Take care, man.
Yep.